The Sony A7IV or the brand new Sony A7V. Now, generally this video should be pretty easy to make because usually the A7V or the upgraded version of the previous gen is better in most ways. And in this case, the A7V actually is better in a lot of different ways. But if you have the A7IV, do you actually really need to upgrade to the A7V? Like, sure, it's an upgrade, but do you really need to? This is the difficult question to ask because there are actually some features that people don't really need, but I mean, it is nice to have, but not necessarily a necessity. And there's a whole bunch of questions you need to ask yourself in terms of who you are and what you do. Are you a photographer, videographer, freelance? Are you full-time? Are you doing this on the side, just like a hobby or something? These are the things you obviously need to consider when you're actually upgrading to anything, a new camera, a new lens, and if it's actually worth your money. But look, sometimes I know some people just like to purchase a new camera just because it's a hobby. That's perfectly fine. That doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to break it down for the people who are kind of struggling when it comes to money, and is it really just worth it getting the newer camera? We got a lot to talk about in this video, so let's get it. So the Sony A7IV is a 33 megapixel BSI CMOS sensor and has the ability to do 4K up to 30 frames per second in full frame and 4K 60 with a crop. You have 10 frames per second when it comes to the mechanical and electronic shutter for photography. It has a 3-inch fully articulating screen, a 3.69mm EVF, a full-size HDMI, it's got a headphone jack in and out, it can take 2 SD cards or a Type A card. And depending on where and when you get it, the price right now is $2,000 USD. Now the A7V is a brand new 33 megapixel partially stacked sensor. This gives you 4K up to 60 frames per second in full frame and 4K at 120 frames per second with a crop. It has 10 frames per second with the mechanical shutter and 30 frames per second in electronic shutter with 14-bit. It has the new 4-axis fully articulating screen, the same 3.69mm EVF. It also has a headphone jack in, out, full-size HDMI, dual USB-C slots, 2 SD card slots and a Type A card slot. And right now, at the time of recording this video, it's about $2,900 USD. Right from the start, let's talk about the sensor. 33 megapixels in the A7IV and a 33 megapixel partially stacked sensor in the A7V. We have to talk about some of the slight cons that we had with the A7IV that has been fixed with the A7V, because these reasons could be the determining factor if you're going to be upgrading to the newer camera. So first of all, that 33 megapixel sensor is a relatively slow readout sensor. It has about 27 milliseconds when it comes to that readout speed, and that's not great at all. You do see the rolling shutter artifacts in the videos, plus it only has 4K up to 60 frames per second with a Super 35 crop. With that partially stacked sensor, we have a faster readout sensor, and it also gives the ability to do 4K 60 full frame with no crop whatsoever. But you have the ability to do 4K 120 with that crop. And the best you can do in the older Sony A7IV is 1080p at 120 frames per second. And there is a really special mode where you can go 4K 60 with a crop, but it is, I guess, slightly more downsampled. But in some of my side-by-sides, the difference is so small, it's negligible. Just keep it in that 4K full frame mode. So if you are someone that needs that 4K 60 quite a lot and really don't like that crop in, then that's almost a reason right there to get the A7V, because if you are in a small confined space and you are cropped in and you sort of don't have a wide enough lens, I mean, that is a bit of a downfall with the A7IV, and I do really wish there was an uncropped 4K slow motion in this thing, but there isn't, but that's what the A7V does. But one of the caveats when it comes to a slower reading sensor, if you do use anamorphic lenses, it will actually make the rolling shutter artifacts become more pronounced from the de-stretching of the image. So you can see the top left-hand corner with the vertical bar that it does sort of warp a little bit when I'm trying to set myself up into the shot. But when you actually go into the motion, you won't actually notice any difference. It's just these types of things that you may see. Something is a little bit off with anamorphic lenses. And I always state in my videos that rolling shutter doesn't really matter. Most people will not even notice a difference. There is just sometimes there may be a shot where you might actually see something and it could potentially just be a little bit distracting for some people. And also when it comes to that faster readout sensor, you're going to get faster stills. So electronic shutter mode, you have 30 frames per second in that Sony A7V. But one of the biggest things that makes this one great is that it's 14-bit color depth. And not a lot of cameras, if any at all right now, have that full bit depth in that 30 frames per second. I do believe the A1 has 50 frames per second in that 14-bit depth. But that camera is priced a lot more than the A7V. Now, one of the biggest downfalls with the A7IV that a lot of people had was overheating. And unfortunately, or fortunately for me, I've never had any overheating issues with the A7IV whatsoever. Sure, I do film in 4K 25 majority of the time. I don't really film in 4K 60 in super long durations. If I'm in 4K 60, I'm in B-roll mode, so I'm doing, 1 minute clips maximum. It's very short clips, and I've never had overheating issues. But if you are having overheating issues, the A7V is so much better. The design of this, they have this little Sigma design. Apparently there's this little Sigma shape that's kind of like a heatsink inside the A7IV. They have like this dual Sigma design in the A7V this time. So the heat dissipation is so much better in the A7V. Like, I was literally recording for an hour and the card ran out. Now, I'm pretty much gonna stop this test because we're pretty much up to an hour. I've got 2 minutes of footage left and you can see the temperature, like it's pretty much 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 33 degrees Celsius, and there's just no overheating. Perfectly fine. Screen is flipped out, recording in 10-bit 422, 4K 50 frames per second, and it's perfectly fine. It's a really hot day today as well. You can see here, the FX2 will obviously have no problems because of the fan on the back, but the A7V, no problems as well. So very well done to Sony. So that's a big one when it comes to reliability in long form recording. So if you were having the issues with that in the A7IV, the A7V might be that one to consider. And also, I just want to jump in here and say, thank you guys for watching all my videos. You guys have what pretty much makes me make these videos. Keep watching them, keep commenting, give me a thumbs up. It's so positive to see everyone in the comments being nice majority of the time. But yeah, back to the video. Now, when it comes to any other problems with the A7IV, I don't really believe there are any other problems as such with the A7IV. It now does come down to just what specs you would like to have or potentially would help you in what you do as content creation. So the A7V has that newer sensor, so it gives you that 4K up to 120 frames per second, but you also have 1080p up to 240 frames per second in S&Q mode. So I mean, if you do shoot a lot of slow motion, it's quite usable file in 1080p. Sure, it is a Super 35 crop, but that's probably fine. If you are doing slow motion, you're probably going to be filming some sort of B-roll and potentially cropped in anyway. Now, one of the great things about the newer Sony cameras is that they're all getting that AI processor. So it's a separate processor to the standard Bions XR processor that's already in there. So that handles a lot of the autofocus performance, but also the stability. But one of the massive pros about this new Sony A7V is that this has the newest Bions XR2 processor. So essentially it combines the dual XR processors and also the AI processor. So it is the first Sony camera to have this newer processor, which can give it a ton of different features. So you have dynamic active stability in the A7V. So it is incredible when it comes to that digital stabilization. But not just that, you have 7.5 stops of stabilization in the A7V compared to 5.5 stops in the A7IV. So when it comes to just standard IBIS stabilization, you're going to get better performance out of the newer camera. So if you were someone that just cannot hold the camera steady at all, maybe the A7V is the go. But the thing is, with the A7 IV, 5.5 stops of stabilization is just enough to take out those micro jitters. You can see here the IBIS works perfectly fine if you throw active stability on, and it obviously crops it a little bit and stabilizes it just more. But that 7.5 stops of IBIS definitely does help, especially when you pair it with active stability, and then you have the ability to pair it with dynamic active stability. Now that dynamic active stability has that 30-ish% crop, so you do have to take that into consideration, but it is nice and steady, and it obviously depends on the person. But look, in all honesty, 5.5 stops of stabilization is perfectly fine, and if you are getting really shaky results with the A7 IV, that's probably on you, and you need to learn how to hold the camera better, or just throw it on a tripod, throw it on some sticks, or use a gimbal, because generally any camera with IBIS should be good enough with basic handheld shots. Now, we've got to go back to that AI chip, because that AI chip does bring obviously other new features in this, and like I was saying, better autofocus performance. So you have the autofocus with the planes, trains, cars, and all those animals and all those kind of things in the newer camera. So there's a ton of autofocus features in there that is optimized for the newer cameras with the AI chip. The Sony A7IV doesn't have that. It was no slouch when it came to autofocus, but Sony have really dialed in the autofocus in these newer cameras. And then with that AI chip, you have auto framing, but you also have framing stabilizer, which is a whole bunch of stabilizing features. So if you don't know what auto framing is, essentially it's this. It is following you around the camera, kind of like keyframing in post-production, but if you don't know how to do that in post-production, this does it live in camera. Super simple, super easy. Makes it look like you've got a bit of a dynamic frame and a videographer behind the camera, which is kind of cool in some situations. I personally don't use it, but it is a nice feature. And don't forget that this is a 7K sensor that downsamples to 4K, so you're still going to get really nice sort of detailed shots, and you won't lose too much image quality when you do this, because you do have three sizes: large, medium, and small crop. I've got on the large crop, so it is fairly cropped in. I'm talking like 60% cropped in. It's heavily cropped, but yeah, it's quite a nice feature. Now, being a newer sensor design of that partially stacked sensor, it has a different dual base level, or unofficial dual base. So you have 800 and 3200 in the A7 IV, but you have 800 and 8000 in the A7 V. Now, I have done some low light performance and side by sides, and I'll flick through the noise performance with the cap on, just to show you guys what the actual noise actually looks like in S-Log. And it's really interesting, because the A7 IV does still look really clean, and obviously better at 3200 than the A7 V, but the noise is kind of finer in the A7 V. It's almost like there's a less noise reduction. I mean, it's up to interpretation here. When I did put it in the real world situation, you kind of see maybe there's a little bit of macro blocking in the A7 IV. It's kind of like when you have some weird artifacts and it's not really fine, grainy noise that you do get in the A7 V. So look, it's much of a muchness, but maybe, this is just a maybe, the A7 V file might be a little bit better in those low light situations. Now, also I do have to mention, if you are a photographer, we do have pre-capture in the A7 V, so that's a pretty big feature if you do a lot of sports, wildlife, and action. Pre-capture can obviously help you not miss that action. It's up to 1 second, so essentially when you press that button, it's already recorded a whole bunch of frames 1 second before you've actually pressed that, so you don't potentially not miss that action. Fortunately, the A7 IV does not have that. Now, one of the biggest features that I love about the A7 V is that 4-axis multi-angle flip screen. It's pretty much the same one as the A1 Mark II and the A7R5. It's an incredible screen that flips up and rotates out. So if you do just want to keep it in front of you, the screen is just there, perfectly fine. It is slightly higher resolution with 2.1 million dots compared to the 1.03 million dots of the A7 IV screen. Not really great. Look, both screens are perfectly fine, but obviously the A7 V screen is better. Now they both have the exact same 3.69 million dot EVF, but the good thing about the A7V, it's blackout free. Because of that new AI processor, it clears out the cache so much faster, and you have blackout free on both the EVF and the back screen, so you're not going to get interrupted shooting if you're in those high frame burst modes. And obviously, if you are a photographer and you do a lot of wired transfer, they have added a new 10 gigabit per second USB-C port on the side. So that's a pretty massive feature if you do high sports action, or if you even fully tethered when you do photography. The A7V is a really good shout. Now, like I said in the intro, they both have full-size HDMIs, which we do see in majority of the newer Sony Alpha cameras. They have a headphone jack in and out, which is great to see. But the great thing about the 3.5 jack in the A7V is that you have the ability to do noise reduction in the camera. Now, I did a little bit of test when it comes to, having noise reduction on and off. Okay, so this is with the noise reduction off in camera. I am probably about an arm's length away from the camera. I'd have the Rode Video Micro microphone on there, because that's the only microphone I still own that's not a Sony microphone. And I'll turn the cafe noise on so you guys can hear it. And this is me just talking normally. With that cafe noise, you'll obviously hear that noise quite a lot now. And we'll switch over to the internal noise reduction. And you can hear this is the internal noise reduction, same distance, the cafe noise is the same levels, it's the exact same cafe noise. So what does it sound like having noise reduction in camera? And what does it actually sound like when there's no noise reduction? Is there a difference between these two? Is it worth it? Let me know in the comments below. I mean, look, is there a massive difference between the two audio files? Not massive. Like, there is a little bit of noise reduction happening, which is great because it isn't over processed like some of the external microphones that you do get, the wireless microphones. Some of those have really heavy noise reduction process, and it's just a bit too much. But sometimes you want that, and sometimes you don't want to have to do it in post-production. So it really depends on the workflow. It is probably better than not having it, but you can still do this in post-production anyway. I mean, let me know your thoughts in this. But I always recommend, instead of using a third-party microphone, just get a Sony multi-interface hot shoe microphone, because there's no cords, you don't have to have a battery, and sometimes you can actually just leave it in auto, and the audio will sound perfect. Now, if you are someone that loves using custom LUTs, well, the A7V has the ability to do 16 custom LUTs in here. So that is great if you do that, but I'm not the kind of person that uses LUTs, so it doesn't really worry me that one bit. Now, when it comes to live streaming, the A7IV only had the ability to do 4K 15 frames per second, which kind of wasn't really usable. You had to go to 1080p at 25 frames per second, but the A7V has 4K up to 30 frames per second, which is really nice for people who do YouTube streaming, live streaming, and all those kind of things. So look, at the end of the day, the A7V pretty much beats the A7IV in almost every aspect, but when it comes to purely image quality, no fast movement, just image quality, they are so similar because cameras these days are just crazy good. Dynamic range on both of these are incredible. The noise performance is incredible. You just have a slower readout sensor on the A7IV. That partially stacked sensor just gives you faster readouts, but also 4K 60 in full frame, then that 4K 120 as well. So if these are the features that you feel like you need or feel like you want, and you have the money to afford the A7V, then obviously the A7V is a really good bet. And it's a fantastic entry level or mid sort of level camera to get in that hybrid game, photography and videography. It does that really well, which is an incredible thing to have these days. But the A7IV is absolutely no slouch. It's a fantastic sensor, and I still use it to this day. Well, not as much anymore because you guys are looking at it through the FX2, so I've been using the FX2. That's another discussion, because do I regret getting the FX2 now that this has sort of come? Yeah, kinda. I kind of want this instead of the FX2. But the FX2 has that fan, so there's a reliability. That's a whole nother discussion we'll get into. So look, at the end of the day, I'm giving you side-by-sides so you guys can make the informed decision if you're going to be, making the change, staying put, potentially buying something else. So yeah, the choice is yours, but I hope this was helpful for you guys. And if it was, please give me a thumbs up. That would be amazing. I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, let's get it.